Hi everybody, this video will talk about how to set up more complex animations within Unreal by using the level sequencer. From the last video we talked about how to set up a moving target, a rotating target when you shoot it, and what we're going to talk about today is how to do some more complex motion that allows it to move and rotate in more complex ways other than just falling down. So what I've set up here is some basic demos, and I'm using the same type of level sequencer for each one of these, just doing a couple different various things with them. So the move-in target, if I come back over here, the move-in target's the exact same base blueprint. If I shoot it, it'll fall over. So I can use the same exact target setup from the previous video, but instead what I'm doing is I'm allowing it to move and fall down. So we need more complex action. We can't just use a timeline by itself. We're using the timeline in the blueprint to be able to allow it to fall over when I shoot it. And I'm going to be using the level sequencer to allow it to move horizontally or do any kind of more complex motion that I want to. Something that's not just a perpetual rotate or a single fall down when I interact with it. So something like moving side to side. I can use a level sequencer so when I shoot it, it'll still work. And shoot it. There you go. But it's still going to move side to side. So I can do more complex things, like within one level sequencer I can have 3 targets that are all moving at different times throughout the space, and they'll all still work if I wait for it to come back through. So when I shoot them, they'll all still work properly. But the nice part about it is I can have much more complex motion while still keeping with the target fall down action with the timeline when I shoot the action there. So this should work as well. This is just a vertical motion action. So I shoot it, it should still work. I can hide targets behind other objects that are part of the same level sequence. So level sequence is really like a cinematic, but I can use it for more interactive based motion as well. So let's create a new one. There's a lot of ways to create new sequences. I've created a folder here, so I always suggest being organized and using a folder system. I have a couple other ones, so we'll just do a different one in this middle area over here. So I'm going to go to the cinematics drop down at the top and choose add level sequence. It's going to ask you where to save this, so let's go to the game content or whatever the subfolder you might want to put it in. Create a new folder called sequences. I title sequences SQ underscore, make sure we're in here, underscore, we'll do small, slow, target move. I don't know, this is kind of a long name, but that'll work for now. So we'll do save, make sure it's in the sequences folder. That added a blank new level sequence. The next thing I'm going to do is double click on that sequence, move it over here so we can see it, and it's blank right now, so I'm minimize this a little bit. So let's minimize this and bring it back up, and here is the visual icon for a level sequence. It's cut off a little bit by the ground plane, but it looks like the clapperboard device used for the film industry. So typically I'll put this wherever I want the level sequence to start. So I'll put this one there. There's my player start, so I'll move it back out of the way so I can still be able to see it. So that's the visual icon of your level sequence. If I open up my outliner a little bit, then I can see what the name of that is. And now if I double click on this again, find out where it went to. There we go. What I want to do is drag objects into my level sequencer. So what I'm not going to do is drag objects into the viewport. I'm going to drag them into the sequencer and then move them in the viewport. So I need some targets, so let's go find my small combined blueprint for my target and drag that into my sequencer. So the important part is when you drag into the sequencer, we get the transform nodes, which then means I can animate it. So let's move this around here and let's go find, it's going to put it in the center of the origin. So there's my target. Let's move it over here. Drag it back in place. And I usually will put this kind of right behind where my level sequence node is. So I can have a generic location of where this is going to start. Alright, I can add some other objects like some housing units of how this thing would actually move side to side. So let's put a couple cubes in here. I'm going to drag from the basic cube, drag one in, and drag another one in because I want one on either side of the target. So let's move this down. I'm going to select both of those cubes, move it over into place. And I don't want this to be this big, so let's do 0.125 and 0.125 for the X and the Z. And then let's do something like 8 for the scale. So that'll be wider. Move it over. My target needs to move up a little bit. There we go. And then now I can position these so it's like on either side of my target. So it'll make it look like it's on a track or something. There we go. So we can put it over there. That should work. So it has some kind of track or rail to follow as the target will then slide back and forth here, or do whatever kind of complex animation I want it to do. But the key thing is we need to drag things into the sequencer and then move them into the viewport properly. Now we can also add anything else like explosions with particle systems or sound effects. The sequencer is really nice for layered video editing timeline that has very complex animation. We can also pull in cameras and have a cinematic or a story, or we can bring in animated characters. It's a very complex editor that's more of like a video editing system here. Alright, so what we're going to do is set up the motion in the sequencer. So I'll move this down a little bit so we can see it. And we have our transform nodes. So if I roll out my transform nodes within the sequencer, I have transform, which will key the location, rotation, and scale at the same time. Or I can just key the location, rotation, or scale individually. There is a save button up here, so as we do edit this, we are going to want to save this and then close it out and then hit play. We'll come back and I'll do the level blueprint setup to get this to run. But overall, let's go ahead and think about time in here. So maybe I want this to be a 5-second animation. So every 30 frames is 1 second. So there's 1 second, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is a 5-second timeline. Maybe I want it to not start animating until half a second in. So with my transform of my BP target, I'm going to hit the transform key button. This button right here is a circular button. It says add new key at the current time. So what I'm going to do is move to the half-second mark, frame 15, and click the key button there for transform. And that'll key the translate or location, rotation, and scale. I want this to move back to the same exact point, so let's do a half second before 5 seconds ends and hit the transform button again. And this is just a good animation technique, as in before you do any actual motion, we set the first keyframe and the last keyframe when I know I want the overall animation to go back to the same exact starting position. Alright, so all I want this to do is just halfway through, maybe on frame 75, move to the other side. So if I move this all the way to the other side, let's go zoom into it. Hit F so we can see it a little easier. And let's pull it about right there. We don't want to go all the way to the edge. And hit the transform button again. Alright, so what that's going to have is going to create me kind of a bluish, greenish dotted line that shows me the motion over time. So that's going to be a 5-second animation. It's really going to not play for half a second. So I'll go back to over here. So it's going to start on 0. It's going to pause or sit for half a second. And then at half a second, it's going to animate towards this other end. And it's going to immediately go back to the other end. And then it's going to pause for half a second and then end at 5 seconds there. So that'll be the timeline motion that we're doing here. We'll come back and make an adjustment to this later. But animating is pretty simple. We come in here and we click the transform button or individual location, rotation, or scale, and then come and move the time to a different time, change the attribute, hit the keyframe button again. Okay. So that's a pretty easy way to set this up. So let's talk about how to trigger this whenever we start playing the level. So we can hit the save button here and close this out. And I want to show you one thing that's going to happen. So when I close the level sequencer and after I hit save, it actually turns off the visibility of that level sequencer. Now I'm not really sure if this is a bug or intended purpose, but it turns it off. We can always go back to our sequence and double click on it. Oh, that's the wrong one. Small, slow. And that way I can see it when the sequencer is visible. So maybe that's a method to show in case I have 500 different level sequences in here. It only visually shows me that sequencer when I have that one selected. So if you close out of that sequence, it's going to turn off the visibility. If you turn it back on or double click on that sequence to open it back up, it'll turn that sequencer back on. There might be a way to turn that on and off, but for our purpose, it's unimportant to have it visible all the time. It actually just makes it easier to organize our scene when we don't have it cluttered with everything. So when I hit play, my other sequences are already set up, but this new sequence is not visible. So I need to be able to turn that on when my level play begins playing. This is in the level blueprint. So before we've created actor blueprints, but what we're going to open up is called the level blueprint. So there's a blueprints drop down, and I'm going to go open level blueprint. All right, let's move this over. So I already have this set up with my other sequences to where when the event begin play, which means when the game mode begins playing, it's going to trigger a level sequence, and then we're also going to tell it to loop that level sequence. And then I have this kind of chained up to play all three of my sequences at once. But let's just start with this new one that we've added, and we'll move down here with this event begin play. I'm going to drag out from that event begin play, and I'm going to choose create, or type in create level sequence player. Okay. Basically what this is we're calling a specific level sequence. Underneath that says level sequence, select asset, and I'm going to go choose my small slow target move, which is one we just created. So this is just pretty much a recall command, and then I'm going to drag the execute out from create level sequence, and then I'm going to type in play looping and just choose to play looping by itself, and it's going to find the target as the self, which will then find the specific level sequence we referenced earlier. And then I need to sync up my out actor to the target, okay, just to make sure it's all working properly. So let's drag that out actor to target. It'll create this target sequence player, which will reference back this one. And that's all I need. So basically if I hit play or compile and close my level blueprint and hit play, now that new level sequence that we created is now running and looping. And if I shoot it, it'll work properly. It'll still animate, so we can always do like a recall ending as after this target's hit to stop the level sequence. But we can also chain up all of my sequences that I have. So let's go back into the level blueprint, open up level blueprint, and we can sync this up. So basically all of these nodes from the first one that I create, I can move them all over here. Let's move the event tick out of the way. And all these, I'm just going to move them towards the left here. And each one of these secondary ones is the same setup. I'm just recalling a different sequence with each one of these. So this one's the small horizontal one. This one's a medium horizontal one. This one's a tall vertical one. And all I'm doing is from the event begin play, I create one level sequence and roll through that process. And then from the execute of the play looping, I'm going to put that into the entrance one of the next create level sequence player. Okay, so let's take these and move them up just to make everything cleaner. And then finally, I can drag select this section and hit C for comment and say play small slow target SEQ for sequence. So that way I can know kind of what this command is doing here. So each one of these is going to be an out execute to the next create level sequence player. We can't have an event begin play leading to multiple things. So what we would do is at the ending of one play looping, we would sync that to the beginning of the next create level sequence. So it's a full chain system here, and we hit play or compile, close that, go back and hit play. That will recall all of my level sequences that are in my level that I have playing and looping how I want to. They'll all still work on top of one another as well. So that's an easy way to set up level sequencing. Let's go back into that sequence that we've created so far, and let's briefly talk about how to adjust the time. Because right now, it's if I go back and hit play, it's a pretty consistent timing as after it starts. Even speed, even velocity. So the red one's really showing that's a pretty even velocity there. So maybe I'll go into that one because I don't have a pause delay for that one. So let's go medium horizontal target move. It should look the same, it's just a faster action here. Well, I'll go back and actually make the bigger adjustment to the original one that's slower. But what we can also do is play with the speed of it. So if I go back and hit play, it's an even speed for that one. I have it open, so there's kind of another visual bug, I guess. Since my sequencer is open, it's actually showing me what looks like there's two targets there. But what that means is it just wants me to save and close my sequencer out before I replay my animation or replay my level. So that was a good visual bug that happens sometimes as well. It just shows you, hey, close that level sequence before we play. So actually, let's go back to the small slow target, which is the one in the front. And since it's 5 seconds, let's go play with the timing. It's the even timing right now. With my BP target small combined track, that's what this is, where we added a new track manually. So each one of these layers is a track. I'm going to click on this button right here that says show the animation keys in a curve editor. If you've done any other kind of animation before in other tools, this curve editor will look very similar to those other curve editors. So it's actually not a complete constant velocity, but this is the curve editor of that target that's animating. So it actually will start slower, speeds up in the middle, slows down at the top as it gets to the left side of the movement, slows down as it goes out, speeds up in the middle, and slows back down as it reaches the last keyframe. So what I really want to do is just play around with the motion here some to make it start slower, really fast in the middle, end slower. So I can take my curves and move them around. What we want to avoid is overshooting like this. So let's undo that once. But what I am going to do is play around with the curve a little bit more. So I can take this middle keyframe and change it to like a linear. So if I change all of these keys to a linear and close this out, hit play, or the save for the sequence, close the sequence out, go back and hit play, that will be a fully constant speed. It's not going to slow down at all as it starts or ends that curve. So let's go back into it, select that track and open it up again. Now let's change it so that we have a smooth tangent, the cubic interpolation, and let's exaggerate that more. So let's take that center one and I'm going to choose toggle weighted tangents. Weighted tangents allow me to exaggerate how much it is slowing down as it moves into that keyframe. So what I'm going to do is take that tangent from one side, click and drag that so it's much wider. Let's do the same thing for the initial one as well. Actually, we have to make that to a weighted tangent. And then we can drag that out more. And do the same thing here. Select that keyframe, toggle weighted, drag that towards the left. So what that's going to do is it's going to be much slower to begin with, very fast in the middle, slow it down as it reaches the end of it. Okay, so now let's back out of the curve editor, save my sequence, close my sequence, and hit play again. So hopefully you can see that timing change much faster in the middle, much slower as it reaches the end. So look at the comparison from the red target in the background, which is even timing, to this blue one in the foreground that starts slow, in the middle of the movement it's fast, and ends slow again. So it's another way we can really adjust the timing, the motion of objects within a level sequence. And that's just as easy as going into the curve for a particular track and playing around with the way that curve looks. So I just want to show you how I have the other sequences set up here. This is the small horizontal target. I think it's this one. Yeah, there we go. So actually, if I hit play again, move this out of the way. This is the one back in the corner that has 3 targets. If I look at it from the side, I have a pause again. They're delayed. Actually, let me close my sequencer and hit play again. So they're delayed, so the first one starts moving, the second one will then move, then the third one will move. So that adds some more variation to it. So let me go show you that sequencer as well. So here's this one visually. Drag it down. So I have 1, 2, 3 different targets. And the first one starts moving, the second one then moves, and then the third one moves. And then move backwards to the other area. So I do have a delayed start here. And then this is the first keyframe of the transform, the first object moving. And then 30 frames later, so 1 second later, the second target starts moving. 30 frames later, the third target starts moving. So it adds some more variety and variation to what the motion looks like throughout this level sequence. I also have the cubes for the actual form and what I'm blocking the shape with, and the rails in this level sequence as well. Although my cubes aren't actually animating, I could animate those as well, but they're not in this occasion. This one, so this is my tall vertical one. I only have one thing that's moving. The only difference here is I'm moving it vertically. So instead of moving it horizontally, over time it's going to move vertically. I could also animate it rotating or scaling over time as well. So same idea there. It's just a vertical motion instead of a horizontal motion. So that's how we can use level sequencers to build more complex motion. And we're using the blueprint, level blueprint, instead of actor blueprints to get a lot of more variety of motion that we can create.